We are live. Yes. Hi, guys. Hi. Great that you're all joining in. I'm just waiting for a couple of people more to join in. You know what we are going to be doing today? We are back to the Instagram lives. I'm trying to get better at it. Improved a bit over the couple of years, but I'm still a bit scared when I have to go live because I keep feeling that I'm going to get something wrong, I'm going to hit the wrong button. All those things keep happening. But yeah, I am getting better at it. As we've discussed, we are going to be in conversation with Shelly Chopra with her new book called Sisterhood Economy. The interesting part is Shelly Chopra is a business journalist and ex-NDTV, I would say. But even more interesting is that I think about 7 years back, she started this platform called She the People, and I think it's one of the most interesting platforms where women are concerned. That it has a lot of stuff regarding women, about women, and for women, and it's been a very interesting place to go to look at women-centric things. And now Shelly Chopra has come out with this book called Sisterhood Economy. The name itself was something that really drew me to it, and I was like, that sounds good. We all as women talk about sisterhood and how but sisterhood economy was so interesting, and I really want to know from her what made her kind of start this, get onto this, write about it, and what is it that we can take away from it, because sisterhood and economy, these are two things that I have not read too much about in combination. But what an interesting thought it is, because we keep saying that women as sisters, let's have our sisterhood and we lift ourselves up and all of that. But what I would say is that, yeah, but talking about it actually and figuring out how we can actually help each other, how can we what is the sisterhood and what is the sisterhood economy, and how can we actually kind of help our sisters. And this is something that I think we all need, and I'm really looking forward to knowing from her. I'm waiting for her to join in, and there I'm just waiting for Shelly to join us.
Hi.
Hi Shelly, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet
you.
you. Doing well. Very excited to be here on the discussion on sisterhood economy with, I guess, another sister from the group.
Listen, I'm so excited about it because, like I was telling that I'm sorry, every time we have an IG live or a book discussion, the sisterhood goes on. I see, come here. And I do not want you talking now. Please, behave yourself. Good girl. Sit down. Here. Sorry about that.
Not at all.
I don't know how she does it every time. And if I don't take her in here next to me, she barks her head off outside the door. So it's like a no-win situation for me. But we've been joined.
I'm a lover myself, so that's good.
Yay! Which breed do you have?
We had one till a few months ago, a beagle.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. That loss is always something that stays with you.
That's true. It's a hard one.
This is a book which, according to what you say, helps women understand the Indian economy. Yeah?
Yeah. Sonali, it's
why economics should matter to women. Yes. And you're highlighting various factors. I found the Sasuma factor very, very interesting. I mean, so I want to know, first of all, before we get to those factors, what I want to know is that what made you write this book, Sisterhood Economy, about Indian economy? What made you write it?
So I think the first reason I wrote this book was that I'm a trained, economics honors student. And for me, it was really important to understand that all these years that I reported on the world of business and the economy, I just always felt that women were reduced to a statistic of what they are not. How few women are part of the workforce, how few actually, are able to run households, how few are CEOs. And I was getting a bit annoyed with the idea of how few. So I wanted to really question whether our definitions of how we term women and their contribution to the economy is a legit way of approaching it. So I thought that instead of taking an economist lens to it, let me take a journalist lens to it. Let me take the lens of a founder of a platform of women and talk to them about what holds them back. And that's why it was important for me to understand, why women don't think of themselves as economic contributors and how little we think of women as potential contributors. So while we talk about all these mega numbers that India could be a $5 trillion economy and that women could be big contributors, what are we doing about women helping that course? Are we actually recognizing that their environment is not comfortable enough for them to get back to work, whether it's their health that becomes impediment, their parents, their in-laws, their children? There are all kinds of things that just hold her back. It never holds a guy back. It always holds her back. Okay, let her compromise, let her change the city, let her change the job. So I wanted to talk about all the other factors that go into this aspect of economic.
Hold on to that thought. I mean, those other considerations, as you were talking about, are really interesting, and we will go into them. But you did mention something about how women, before when we were talking about this, how women are not thought of as the economic contributors.
Yeah.
Going by the traditional way of thinking, in the patriarchy way of thinking, or whatever you would call it, in that way of thinking also, we are sitting here in India, you're talking about Indian economics, and look at the Indian, say, a marriage market. That's what it is, the way they look at it. And in that, there is, if I'm not mistaken, even till today, now there's this new thing that where you want the girl to be educated and having a certain kind of a job and stuff like that. These are the demands, if I'm not mistaken, that are put out in when they are looking for the girl, and the so-called rishta is happening. So you're saying that though they're asking these questions and they want the bride or the girl or the rishta that they're taking to have all these aspects to it, it's no longer just being able to sing or dance or cook and sew and stuff like that, but having a certain decent kind of a job so that it's a two-income household. Even after that, you say that even then there is no acknowledgement of the fact that women are economic contributors.
Yeah, for sure. So I think what you and I are talking about right now is something that's reduced to very few women. Women are breaking out of those shackles and trying to assert themselves. But the numbers are very few. And I often say this, as I have written in the book, that many of the challenges that a laborer in rural India has, a female laborer, are not quite different from the woman sitting in Sobo or South Delhi, because these women necessarily have no agency, to take decisions on their own lives. They may have money, they may have comfort, they may have the security of a very well-to-do family, but are they able to, let's say, have their own money? Are they able to run their own business and not, let's say, pursue something because it looks good that the daughter-in-law of a certain family is doing only, no job is less or more, but she's sort of left to do things that look appropriate and are not necessarily what she's trained to do. There's a beautiful anecdote here given to me by another woman who lives in these societies, who shares about how her entire circle of friends are from Ivy League colleges, and they are completely unemployed because they were never permitted to work. They have happy, very smart degrees, but have they put those degrees to use? They haven't. Why? Because they were told that they can't. हमारे घर की लड़कियां बाहर जाके काम नहीं करती हैं. There's so much money in the house. Why do you need to work?
But this is so prevalent even today.
Very much so. Very much so. So, I always say this, and not just because of the book, I've been saying this for years. We always think these are other people problems. ये हमें नहीं होती हैं, ये बाकियों की stories हैं. I think that's the mistake we make, because most of the time these stories are happening in our own backyards. They're happening to our cousins, some to our own, within our own family. And a lot of the time we don't want to acknowledge it, because it just seems that in 2022 we are still talking about this.
So one is this problem where they say that हमारे घर की बहुएं बाहर जाके काम नहीं करती is the thing that you're saying. The fact that you said that, be it the laborer in some village and, the women from rarefied, you could say, the societies or whatever, from that atmosphere also are facing similar problems, because they're not doing work of their choice. The laborer women are probably doing it because this is what they need to get the food on the table, to bring up the child or whatever. And here you're saying that say, forget the fact that where they don't need to work because there is enough money in the family. They don't have their own money, but there is that. But what about the middle class where, you know, the bride is or the woman is expected to work because it needs to be a two income household.
Yeah.
Over there, from what I understand, what you're saying is that it's supposed to be a job, but it needn't be the job that the woman necessarily enjoys doing or what she's trained to do. But it could be because this job is closer to home, this job works while the children and, you know, ghar ko sambhal ke it can be done. What you're trying to say is those are the factors that come into play.
So I'm saying that it's not just about the job. I celebrate any woman who says that I am making choices that work for me and my family. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And the book
Okay.
doesn't make any claim that a certain type of job is a job and a certain isn't.
That's
In fact,
interesting.
in the book I say this, that all women are working women, only a few are salaried. The point that's being made is that do
Is
women
it?
have over their own lives? And financial freedom is one part of that agency, which comes from working outside of the house, largely because in India or rest of the world, we're still debating whether we can pay women for household work. So the challenge isn't necessarily about what type of job they end up doing. The challenge is that women mostly, thanks to our society and our upbringing, even in 2022, are having to opt out of things that they would rather do and are forced to do things that they would rather not do because of what our a patriarchal system has been. And this patriarchy is not necessarily, as my book again talks about, it's not always in the husband's house. It's often in our own house. So one of the one of my chapters here deals with the notion of raising gharelu daughters, and it really is an essence of how we forget to look into our own house and say, our moms are making bad decisions. We always glorify the ma and we denounce the mother-in-law. In the book, I've tried to do a little bit of the reverse as well, at least put that as a question in everyone's face, that sometimes mothers are to blame for how they raise their daughters to remain number two within the stature of the hierarchy of the house,
Yeah.
not put dreams ahead, just perhaps not wear what they want. Like the number of young girls who tell me, I am just constantly battling a fight with my mom about how I dress, you
Yeah.
know. Things are very much alive. So whether it's about making career choices or clothes choices, it's about choice. And the choices are not something that women continue to have, which to me is the biggest definition of feminism, having the choice to make the choice, right? So I think that is really the essence of the book, and it tries to come out with these natural anecdotes, right? Like, for example, there's an anecdote about education in this very chapter of Gharelu Daughters, because a lot of girls I spoke to said they were doing their double PhD because the more you study, the less chance of you getting married immediately. So you're using education as a way to push marriage, because marriage is something that has to be done according to the parents, right? And it's something you have as a milestone. So these girls are wondering, what do I do? How do I push this back? I don't want to get married. I don't want to get married. I no. So I'm just
I
going to
would say
study.
that I don't want to get married right now would be the thing. I mean, you know, it's not like everybody's against the.
Right. But how many parents want to listen to that, right? Because the girl is 21 or 25 or 27, and what do they say? The clock is ticking, right?
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, I don't see that at all anymore in our world.
yeah, yeah. No, I get that. So, you've spoken about how the ambitions, the desires, the dreams of women, and how it's not just the sasuma but the ma also who is kind of training. And this is where we always come in, that it's a lot of times you find women who are so in our subconscious, we are so governed by the patriarchy that we are bringing up our daughters, our nieces, to a certain degree to be submissive. And I would say to kind of say that don't get the attention to yourself, kind of stay in the background, don't come out in that bloom that you are. And yeah, somewhere we are constantly we see that all around us. And you like really, like, that is a point that you've made, which kind of completely understand. I would say this is about Indian economics, but I've also found this all over the world in a certain degree or the other, not just in India. I mean, whenever I travel, I see that in a lot of other societies also. And so-called many of these developed nations, I find the same problems. Maybe the degrees might be less, but it is definitely something that is there. You've also mentioned that, more that in the pop culture that, that it drives women into silos. Can you just explain that a little bit more?
Sure. And it's interesting that we're talking about pop culture because a lot of people say pop culture and economy, why are they even connected?
Yeah.
And I keep reminding them that, we have this notion of what an economy is, that we keep thinking it's about debit, credit, money exchange. It actually is about its people and what those people get from it, right? At the end of the day, it's about our feelings, and what we are able to extract from an economic transaction or a process leads us to becoming better people, or, do different things, fulfill different desires. So to me, all of these things, including entertainment, is very central to the idea of our economics today. And
Right.
here's why. The way we portray women in television or the in big screen, whichever kind of screen today, hasn't changed in decades. There is a small degree of shift, which we are celebrating a lot, as you and I, because we see it around us, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for most people, there is still that notion of the dabang hero and the bechari heroine. And it is something that continues to play out from television into homes, into the way people think. For example, the idea of how marriage is portrayed on television, it's very much so ingrained in the way society is. So one mirrors the other. We always say the woman is paraya dhan. She has to be married, nahi. She has to be married off, right? You have to live, like, send her off, because what she do in this house was never hers, right? And I find that it's very tragic, because a lot of girls who are trying to break this realize that their efforts can be of no use if every day we feed this into our society through the medium of pop culture. And this, I think, is across the board. I hear this from women who are singing the songs. I hear this from women who are writing lyrics. I hear this from directors, women behind the camera. It's always the male gaze that determines how a woman is projected.
The economics of the entertainment industry, which I'm from also, is really determines, and that usually the economics are kind of dominated by the male gaze. And I think it is time, and that's why the sisterhood is the important thing. That this is something that even whenever I talk about parenting and I talk about or when we are talking about working and what I've learned through the process of the thing. And this is what I feel that when I started working, just sharing a small thing with you, the only other woman on the set except for the lead actress was her hairdresser. And believe me, you need the union card to be a makeup artist or a thing. And women were not given the card to be the makeup artist. They could only be the hairdressers, and that is what they would be doing. And that she was the only other female on the set. So today, when I see so many more girls on the set who are assistant directors, who are assisting the camera people, who are doing the clothes, who are doing makeup, hair. There's so many more women on the set. And I think in this, the way I can contribute is at the moment there is a woman writer or a woman director who comes to me with something, I'm like, I want to hear this. Sometimes it might not be what I want to do, but I definitely want to hear it. And if I can, I want to push it. And I think somewhere when you talk about sisterhood, because that's the book, this is something that I think all of us as women need to kind of just remember and go that little extra mile and help out our sisters. And so I love that fact that you said sisterhood economy, and maybe
Yeah. It's what you just said, because I say this again and again, and it's not new to the book. It's been, through the show Sisterhood, and earlier as we set up She the People, that there is this notion that we're constantly told, right, that women are the women's worst enemy. And I think this is really tragic, because this is also a patriarchal system at play. Often women say this. Women train other women to believe that other women are your enemies. It's not the way forward. It shouldn't be the way forward. Just
here
last.
we are an actor and a journalist, though in different kind of zones talking about it. But I remember another anecdote. The thing was that always the question, whenever there were two actresses in a film and, working on something, two female actors is now how we like it to be addressed rather than, so there would at once the question be, are you getting along with her? And my question always used to be that I don't see you asking the male actors this question, because they are doing the film and there's this whole brother relationship going on, and you're talking about how much fun they're having. But whenever you come to to a female actor, and if there are two of them, you always want to find out how they're not. Why do you assume that they're not getting along? And I don't seem to have any problems with them, but there is a problem. You keep digging for this question. And of course, the thing is that today with social media, you can actually say this and people can hear this. But earlier, when it used to be written, these are the answers that never got published. These were the questions that they would go into the back burner because it was not interesting enough or wouldn't be interesting for readers or whatever. And these were the questions that were constantly being, this lie that you're talking about, women being women's worst enemies, women can't work together, is something that has been propagated all the time. I have a team of women and they're fantastic in their jobs, and I think I love the fact that I can have that right now. I just really miss that. Please tell me, tell me, what do you think about this also?
No, this is actually the truth. But what I add in the book, and I say this as well very often, the men can play a big role. And I think that we should get them to play a big role because, it's so important that men who are allies are speaking about this, because if they do, then a lot of other men get the signal much faster, right? Because a lot of them are not used to hearing back from women. I think while the process of them getting used to that notion is on, in parallel, I think a lot of men can make a big difference. And a huge number of men have been champions of my work for women from day one. From the day people started, Anand Mahindra backed it. In the course of the last few months, I've been trying to build a platform for women's health. A lot of men have been champions and supporters and advisors and mentors. I just think that it's important for us to talk about those men a lot more as well, those who are making a difference to this. And therefore, when they're around, I think it's good for them as well to announce other women in a room full of opportunities, right? I mean,
let's do this, like, while we are on this, and more and more people are joining us, and I would want to say that while we are on this conversation, in the comments below, I want all our sisters to write which are the men in their lives who can be part of the sisterhood, because this is obviously what it is. Sisterhood is not about just the women and all of us, but there are some men who are part of our sisterhood, and it would be lovely to have in comments, who do you think are the men in your lives who can be part of the sisterhood? Sorry, that was a digression. Go ahead.
Book as well, we say that it is by and for women, where the word men is in brackets, to say that this book is very much so for the men and boys who can read, about what the economy will really mean or have if we actually have the other half of the population joining in. And also there are so many other elements to it which we just never think about, that women have to stake their claim on not just public spaces, but for example, private spaces. It's unusual for people to think that women should have the right to pleasure, the right to, having...
1 second, when we go into the private space, before that, while you're talking about the public spaces, and when you're talking about what the economy could be if we understood that there's this whole other half, which we are not even counting. So as an economist, and you're dealing with economics all the time and all of that, and as a business journalist, whatever you've seen, how do you think it should change where the government is concerned, where the society is concerned, where you actually, when you're calculating the economy, and how do you make this facilitate the fact that there's this whole huge workforce that's not even being counted? Is that how it would be? That be the right word to say?
Yes, that would be the right word. That we are not counting enough of the female workforce because we still define it in a very traditional way, which needs to change for many reasons. The fact that our female working population in today's data set is below 25% is an appalling figure. In the United States, this figure is close to 50% of the female population working. Now, one of the reasons why it's a poor reflection, because we don't think that women who, let's say, work in beauty parlors and only earn in cash are really working. Or in many of the unorganized sectors, whether it's about sewing or whether it's offering masseur services, or even in some cases, even tutors who don't necessarily put in their earnings into a fixed account with many times their services just go unchecked because they're running in an unorganized economy, right? And I think that just the formula and calculation aside, the larger problem is that this micro entrepreneurship around us, we don't count that enough. I am very delighted to see that in the last month and a half, a large number of people have read the chapter on beauty parlor economics in my book, and many of them are startup owners who tweeted about the fact that this is a micro entrepreneurship space that we are not recognizing, but it could be a game changer for women. That said, I also rally for the fact that don't look at a woman and then tell her ki ha please do a beauty parlor or start a papad or an achar business. You know,
Yeah.
we do need to have women everywhere, whether it's in data science or whether it's in microbiology. The point is that in some cases, women are able to at least get calculated. So purely on a calculated point of view. But from an opportunity point of view, I feel we should encourage each other to do much more with what we have. I also feel we should encourage each other for not stepping down. Every time there is a domestic situation, we're the ones to step down. Don't step down. Stick
Yeah.
around. Stick
So
around.
how do you think we can raise the awareness to this? Like what you said was the unorganized sector. Like the beauty parlor. Let's not now stop calling them the beauty parlor and let's call them the unisex salons, because I find men equally needing
Yeah.
to care for their skins and their toes and their fingers and hair and etc. etc. So let's call them that. So how do we kind of bring more awareness to this sector as women? I don't
Yeah.
you might be doing certain things on your platform, Sheila People, but how do we do it?
Yeah, I think while you're right, while we should look at them as unisex salons, but most of the country doesn't still, right? We're just looking at it from a city perspective. But if you do look at many of the the various kinds of possibilities with micro entrepreneurship, women stand to gain the most. And I think that is the most important part. That all this while this fear that we can't get out of our house to work, some of these micro entrepreneurship opportunities are the first step in the direction of becoming a working woman. I say that even on the internet, a lot of young girls, who, for example, who work with She the People, are working in different cities and states in the country. We have a colleague from Siliguri, we have one in Nainital, another one from Salem. All of these people are able to work because of technology. So, given the kind of opportunity technology is offering us and the possibilities that women have had, because work from home was something they wanted to embrace because it just seemed like they were much more in control of their lives, not to miss the extra side dish of too much work at home. But for many, this is something that has become a possibility that I can work if I'm working out of home. So, I
No,
think we need
I
to.
think Terry, that's fair enough. I think technology is helping that, and it's wonderful that the technology is helping with this, because also we are the child bearers in that sense, So and every with this kind of technology coming in, there are a lot of us who want to take care of their child, who voluntarily want to do certain things where. When you're a mother, and being able to have slightly flexible hours and yet be able to work is an amazing fact, because most of the time I find that once you take the leave for having a baby, and if you don't get back, then you're just out of the game. And if you come back after a couple of years, it's just too late, and most of the time women just can't seem to break through and come back into the workforce, into the jobs that they were doing or something similar to that. So I am hoping that technology is going to kind of change that factor in a huge way. So yeah, but an interesting thing. Sorry.
Yeah.
Continue,
For
please.
sure. I think the other constituents who really benefit, not just from technology, but the conversations we've had at Sisterhood Economy, are single women. India has one of the largest populations of single women, and it has been so important for us to start talking about them, because we've always put them in that bechari silo and just left them. I mean, I remember being in a coffee shop just last year and overhearing two boys talking about a girl who was having coffee by herself, just conjecturizing whether she's really alone, maybe she's lonely, maybe she needs somebody, maybe nobody cares for her. I'm like, she must be just having a good time. Let her be. She just
Yeah. Must be like, oh my God, I want some me time and away from everybody.
and we don't recognize that. But on the serious side of it, we've looked at women who are caregivers to their mums and have chosen not to marry, because to them marriage is not important. For many, institution that needs to break down. For another one who says this, she said, I've seen people in my family get married and their relationship has just been past the salt. And she's such such depth. She's like, it's literally been that. There's been no conversation, right? And so I think women are making the choices where they can to at least parachute out of this. And what's helping parachute out is the ability to have your own money. So at least you're not dependent. You're not marrying for financial dependence. I mean, Kani Surka, who's a comedian, talks about this amazing story about how she wanted to get married because she never thought she was capable of earning her own money. So she gets 3 years down, she realizes this is a terrible marriage and it cannot work. She gets thrown into the deep end and she starts working. And she discovers the fact that she's an improv artist. I mean, naturally, she's an improv artist. Does these amazing shows, as we know, we've seen her with Cyrus Brocha and many others, and she's a superstar. I mean, I couldn't believe her journey when she told me that. But how many of us think like, we are like pain, sacrifice, show of strength. That's what women are about. That's what
just goes to underline what you were saying about how most of the time it's not in the in-laws' house, it's happening in our own homes where, our mothers and whatever. But in the meanwhile, there's like Sadhana says that she's waving out. She says that my husband and my father, as part of the sisterhood, Binny says my brother, and Avran says that we can make a dent in the universe. And I like these responses. Keep more of these responses coming because we want to know exactly what you guys think, and keep sending us who you think. It could be your friend, it could be, your brother's friend sometimes, and, it could be anybody, just, neighbor who could be giving you that push and helping you kind of, think of yourself in a different way. And I think those men can join our sisterhood. Have I put it right, Shelly, if I say it that way?
No, absolutely. And, even many of the minority genders would resonate with a lot of the work that we put in Sisterhood Economy, to the extent that, we talk about success as an idea of Rambo, somebody who is suited, booted, in control, and is sitting on the desk and like signing big checks. But the idea of sisterhood economy, and this is why these conversations are so important, is that we should celebrate being vulnerable. We should celebrate being ourselves. We should celebrate just the fact that we're able to pass through some decisions with great, elan, but many of them with great struggle. And it's okay to do that, right? Because we are all the time, as moms, for example, talking about how important it is to fail. But we don't give ourselves that luxury. It's just impossible. A woman thinks, oh my God, if I fail, it's over. It's over. It's just completely over. And I think I'm saying this with my own experience, right? Which is why a lot of the times all of us are the same. Whether we are laborers, whether we're working as CEOs, whether we are building a business, whether we are just mothers or working at home, we're all putting ourselves to some bizarre benchmarks where we're expected to deliver top notch of everything. I should be the top CEO and roll the best chapatis. I don't want to do that. I don't want that pressure. We should not have that pressure.
So when you talk about yourself also, what is Shelly at home like?
Oh gosh. Oh, that's a tough one. I just spend a lot of time reading about the importance of being myself. I haven't done that by training. I've learned that by accident. And I just couldn't.
What do you mean by accident? Was it some incident that taught you that? What was it?
I think many incidents, many incidents come in your life where you realize that, you ask yourself the existential crisis that many of us have, is this the entire life? And if this is this all I wanted to be? I mean, am I losing out of things because I'm putting myself up to this standard that everybody sets me up against? You've done this, you have to be this, you have to be the best daughter, the best daughter-in-law, and the best mother, and the best wife, and the best yourself, and like, what? This is just too much, right? And I think you don't even have to be the best. Sometimes it's just so nice to be yourself and tell yourself, I sometimes say this aloud in the house, I am prioritizing myself for today. Just nobody come and bother me.
Tell that to the people in your family that,
I do that. I do that. And in the book, I reflect this, that I'm married twice. And my first divorce was within 9 months of my marriage. One of the things I really talk about is that I didn't, I changed a lot about myself in my first marriage. By the time I reached the second one, I was like, I'm not changing an iota about myself. I'm going to be exactly the person I am. I am not going to be somebody who's given a definition, in matrimonial ads. This is how she is, what she should do. This is how she's going to live her life. I will be myself. Anybody who wants to come along, please come along. Anybody who doesn't want to come, don't come along. Because we may have a for us to say this. We as women often we don't have the luxury to say it. often we just don't say it out of such massive fear. I've seen so many of my
Yeah,
friends.
because we've never been, that's the way we are brought up. We're brought up to
We don't
believe that
out.
we need that one male or we need somebody in our lives. How can we be alone? We're
Yeah.
constantly taught to be frightened of being alone. So, Shelly, tell me, who in your life is in your sisterhood? Who are
Loads
the
of.
males in your life who can be in your sisterhood?
So, I actually have a lot of friends, both women and men, who are supportive of my journey in so many different ways. But the reason I never point out one person is the simple reason that I actually draw different kinds of strengths from different people. Just yesterday I was telling somebody that, the power of the sisterhood lies in the fact that if I am really looking for, let's say, somebody who loves books, maybe I'll think of Sonali. But if I'm looking for somebody who is a CEO and needs to solve for a problem that I may have as a CEO, I'll go look for one who will do that. Or if I'm facing a very hard moment, like my last week was really difficult, and I kept thinking, who should I talk to, right? I just kept it inside me, and the reason I told myself that I needed to talk to somebody was because I don't ever ask. Like many other women, we don't ask, we don't say, up the phone, and we don't pour out because, hey, what will they think of us? They'll judge it. They'll make us feel like maybe they may not make us feel like that. Maybe it's that initiative and just say it and get it off our system.
But we do also say that there are so many times when we feel that, what you said is true, but when we do actually share, there are so many times when women, because maybe there is a certain way that we are made, the way there's a certain chemicals that go, the hormones in us that are so similar that maybe we just, if we actually spoke to another woman and said that I'm going through this, what do you think? There might be an answer that can work for us far better than somebody who is not a woman, because there are certain similarities in what we are thinking. I mean, there are so many times when the woman can probably tell you, are you all okay? Is everything okay? What has been the thing? I mean, you just kind of get onto that spot much better, maybe. There were these private spaces that you were talking about when I had interrupted you and I'd gone to the public spaces. But I do want to know more about the private spaces that you were talking about when I interrupted you at that point.
So, there's a very important chapter in the book called The Big O, Equality in the Bedroom. And to me, that's a very important chapter. I know a lot of my friends keep mocking me, saying, why do we need to put sexual pleasure in a book of economics? And I keep reminding them that this is...
Why? Why do we need to put sexual pleasures in a book of economy?
Because I think sexual rights are the first place where you get negated for them, right? In any relationship, the first place that a woman is made to feel that she is nothing but an object of desire is in the bedroom. And it doesn't matter whether you're married or not. I'm just talking about any physical relationship. Yeah, it is, because most women are told that their bodies are not for them. It's their bodies are to be presented as an object of desire. That's why half the time our entire beauty industry is talking about lightening our face so we can fit the norms that many men want women to have. Perfect figures, perfect nose, perfect smile, no gap in teeth, no crooked noses like the one I have. You know what I mean? Like, there is this constant need to do this. Now, we have built this industry for so many years, the need for perfection of a certain kind, that women have just internalized the idea that if I have to please myself or another person, it's all will be about me being somebody who's going to be literally presenting her body to someone else. How many times do women have conversations about their own sexual rights, their right to pleasure? And this, by the way, is at the most fundamental level. Sexual pleasure makes everyone happy. Yeah, right. Sexual pleasure by consent, I should say that with triple underlines, makes everyone happy. So that's number one reason. But the second most important reason is that when women start staking claim to sexual pleasure and sexual rights, they're actually reflecting far better agency over their own body, because they know when they can say no.
The moment you have far better agency on your body, then it's your rest of your environment around you, and that's how you kind of progress. I get that. I mean, I must say, I'd never thought of it like that, but that's such an interesting way to look at it, and I fully get why this has to be a part of the book of economy. No doubt about it. So yeah, tell me, it's been a journey. A business journalist to an entrepreneur to an author. How has it been? What has this journey been like? I mean, I'm talking about very broad spectrum in that sense, but it's a question I want to understand. Shell, who has written this book called Sisterhood Economy. What is it? What has your journey been that it came to the point where you've written this book? I just want to understand you a little bit more.
So I think my journey in 2 words is called hard work. Um, it wasn't easy by any means because I come from a very simple family. My dad was in the military and my mom worked at home. She came from a fairly conservative family and my dad came from an extremely progressive family. So, the regular battle at home, how to get torn between a family that wants you to conform and a person that you're becoming who doesn't want to conform. So for me, all of this really led me to pursue something that I stumbled upon by chance, which is became a journalist. All started by reading the news at assemblies in school. But, I just see every time I would meet somebody and this would turn out to be a journalist or a presenter on news.
Why a business journalist? Now, again, let's go down this route also. There are journalists and there are a lot of them, and business journalist is not something, again, you've kind of broken the norm and changed the norm over there by, doing journalism, but doing business journalism. Can you tell me more about that?
So, business journalism came to me for 2 reasons. One, that I was very, I was inclined towards economics. I ended up doing that. I felt very bad not justifying my bachelor's degree. So I said, let's do something about that. But I think it also came from the fact that there were such few women. I just felt like this was really the gap that I wanted to break. And I must have done this subconsciously because I didn't think of it as a women's issue at that point or gender problem. But I noticed by the time that I'd entered it, that this was one. There were a few journalists who were women, but they were not the ones who were breaking, sort of the big stories. And a lot of them were presenters. And it became really interesting one for me, like Warren Buffett or Ratan Tata or, many others in the course of and fairly early, like, I was probably in my early 20s when I was doing this. And soon I became a very important editor to NDTV. And then I was poached by ET Now and, it sort of became like the person everybody wanted to see on TV. It was a big high. But like a lot of things in my life, I like to take a decision about making a switch, and switch at a time when I feel that, okay,
what made you make the switch?
Huh? What made me make the switch? Yeah,
make the switch.
So actually, it was that Warren Buffett interview. This interview was about 15 to 16 years into my career, 2013, 12 maybe. And the reason I did that is, and I start the book by saying this, that the interview was not so important to anybody, according to me, other than the fact that it was Warren Buffett and it was businessman, this, that, and the other. But what it did for me was just remind me that I wasn't here just to interview the ones who had made it. I had to interview people who hadn't made it. And those were the stories that we were not telling. The same 10 women, 10 men, every time, same magazine, same awards, 10 awards go to the same lot of people. How do we change that? How do we get out of that sort of structure? And so I started talking to different people and said, okay, I want to work with women because I've not had the opportunity to hear their stories in my journalistic career. Maybe that's part of my own failure, but the system was always such that, most of the people, the powerful people or the smart people were men. I just couldn't believe that would be true. So I got off that and I literally, my resignation in all my 3 resignations has been, I am off. 3 words. That's all. I have never put in long resignations. I've never put in long explanations where I'm going, why I'm going, what I'm going to do next. It's always been I'm off because I feel like I want to get on to the next story before I can even, sort of look back at what I'm missing. It was very hard to not see my face at 9 p.m. every night on the television. I guess it's similar for people in your industry. But I just put my head down into a world of digital, which was a parallel universe back then. And said, we're going to find women and we're going to find them in droves because they are there. And, we just don't know where they are. So this was the time I was in Bombay and I traveled around the country and met and interviewed a lot of women. And see, what do women say when you interview them? Maine kya kiya hai? I don't think I'm an achiever. I'm like, this is about how we talk about achievement.
Absolutely. Right? It's you don't take compliments. It's like, it's just very difficult. Yeah, I understand. Totally.
For them, it was like, if you have to achieve, you have to be a big CEO. And that's another thing that I constantly talk about in the book, that let us not make ourselves into people who benchmark a success story with that of being of a CEO. You don't have to
Correct.
be a CEO to be successful.
Yeah, yeah.
Could be even putting the food on the table in your house, the breadwinner, and you'll be super successful, more successful than many CEOs who are perhaps, in a different zone altogether. So let's not benchmark success to the idea of a person who's made it, because that's a horribly large benchmark to put. You mean that women are only successful when they become CEOs? What a terrible benchmark to have, yeah? What about everyone else?
Exactly, exactly. Absolutely, I get it. Just while we are at it, Darshan asks, what do you think about women having their own agency, and why is it important?
Yeah. Oh, it's so important. Okay, I'm just going to say a few lines about why it's important, because I think that, we should be able to say no to things we don't want. The agency we deserve, whether it's financial freedom or any other rights, is because we should have the option of saying no and walking out of situations. Think about it. All of us are nonstop looking back. Are we safe when we're walking? When we're climbing escalators, who's behind us? Who's in front of us? Slight light elevators. Oh my God, I'm so scared of being in elevators sometimes, right? There's only one person there. I'm like, okay, what if something
Absolutely,
happens?
yeah.
Your life is a what if, what if, what if, what if. And therefore, it is so critical to be able to walk out of these what if situations. That's so important for us.
So there is a charming dessert rose says, I'm suffering from domestic violence. I'm not educated enough. I have a daughter. How to exit?
Yeah.
Is this the right question for you, Shelly? Is there any way you can help with this question?
Very honest, I would just say that I'm not the right person to answer this question, but I do want to add that I hear about these stories every day, and a large number of those stories are in the book, for the simple reason that a lot of the times people are tied in domestically and financially, tough relationships which don't permit them to step out. So perhaps what this person's expression is also a sign to a lot of others that this is why we talk so much about agency. And perhaps her daughter could be the one who could see this and study and find a job and find a way out of the situation. These are stories that
I would say that should be we
us.
could we conclude on it by saying that uh, considering that you have a daughter, I mean, taking that call and seeing that just the fact that your daughter should not be going through what you're going through and should not be in this situation, you are going to be the example for the daughter. And I think if the moment you get that sort of thought process behind you, I'm sure you'll find a way to make it good for your daughter. And I think if that sort of driving force, I think if that can be used and harnessed, I think it would you can find the way out of it. What do you think? Am I making any sense in this when I say this?
No, of course, of course. This is the other part of the sisterhood. Sometimes we may not have ready-made solutions because
Yeah,
problems are.
because it's not always perfect and it's not always okay, and it's not so simple to exit. There's so many considerations that come into play, and especially when you're a mother, and we can't help feeling the maternal feelings that we are built that way, and but maybe harness those maternal feelings and see to it that you're a better example for your daughter, maybe, and try to you will find the path there. Maybe that could be the thing.
Yeah, sure. And also the fact that you're here listening to these conversations, so you recognize that they are real and we're all talking about them. And that gives perhaps you the strength to go that extra mile to see how your daughter may not have to be in a position like yours in the future, which to you will be your biggest achievement, my hunch is.
Nice, nice, yes. Vinny says, thank you for having these conversations. It helped a lot when I was getting divorced and helped change my perspective. I wish you all the best, and I hope this is going to go well. And I hope this changed perspective makes you find yourself. I think that
Yeah.
is what is most important for all of us women. That we need to find ourselves somewhere. We are kind of um, in our subconscious, we're so brought up to kind of lose ourselves, put everybody and everything else ahead of ourselves, that we lose ourselves. So finding ourselves is not so easy. It is a difficult space. So I've asked you about So yeah, the question, you came from there to she the people. You became the entrepreneur from looking at all these women and finding all their stories. You become the entrepreneur. That has gone really well. From there to being the author now. What made you write this book? You were now working with women. You were doing what you thought, where the gap was, what you felt was the gap in your this thing. You were doing that already. So, and you were on the platform, and a fairly successful platform. So why the book?
You know, it just the book just came out of conversations like these, like the one you and I are having, because I realized that I'm talking to so many hundreds of women every single day, and something is just holding them back. The only thing holding them back is their situation or the X factor, the ones that we talked about, whether it's the mother, whether it's equality in rights, and whether it's pleasure. But actually, all of them want to start being looked at as economic human beings, people who contribute, people who change the game, people who make possibilities happen, right? So I think it was really important for me to pen that down, because I just felt that this kind of a book hadn't been written which talks about economics, talks about women, makes it a fun and fearless read without necessarily having to kind of go through like a paper, a research paper, yet gives you just the right anecdotes that remind you, hey, you know what? You're right. I need to do this. I need to do this, and I need to do this now.
Maybe I think what I would take away from this also is that maybe there are a lot of women who are not really economically independent at this point of time. But in this sisterhood economy, I would say sometimes reminding your family or the people around you as to what your contribution is, and every time somewhere when you save money that is also a contribution. And sometimes letting them know that, listen, if I cook this meal for you, if somebody else and you were paying them for it, this is what I'm helping you save. Just accepting the fact that I'm contributing and making others see that I'm not a nobody, I am contributing. I think that also could be part of a sisterhood economy to start off with. Maybe that would be a way to kind of start with.
Of course, you know, we going back to where we started, exactly the point. We're all working women. Some of us are salaried. Please note that what you do is not work. It is work. And for the first time in the last 3-4 years, we are all talking about it. How hard we all work. I mean, really, I say this aloud 10 times. How hard do women work? They really work very hard. And, it's it's something we should be not necessarily proud of, but I would say that we should recognize it, because recognizing it is the first step to be able to decide how much you want to continue to do it.
Absolutely. That's fabulous. It's been like a wonderful conversation. I want to look up. Can you tell me more about the what do you say, the graphics on the about the cover? Would you
Yeah, it's like three women from different backgrounds holding up the sisterhood economy, saying that we're in it together.
Yeah, yeah. Sisterhood economy of, by, and for women.
And men.
Amazing book, and I, really, yeah, and women, the in bracket, perfectly put. What do you think is next? Because you have gone from, you've changed the jobs, as we would say. So what after sisterhood economy?
So actually, I've already started that, and it's inspired by people like yourself who have fought difficult health battles, and continue to do that. It's called Gayatri, Gayatri.com, Gytree. It's focused on preventive health for women, and the platform is all set to go live. And the idea is to basically look at how women who have different preventive health issues can get ahead of that health challenge by just doing regular checks. And in a very, very virtual first sort of platform, we are ensuring that women have any hormone from the time they have the menstruation all the way to menopause. How can they keep a tab on it long before it turns into a disease? And my focus is
interesting.
Yeah, let's just change the way women think about their health. That is my big.
Because, again, the health is always the last one. I mean, if the family's budget for health is this much, they say, oh, let the husband get checked. Let the, half the time especially when I was at that point of time working a lot with where with cervical cancer and all of that, when you look at it, and you know, it's just regular checkups, and all the time, women wouldn't come for that pap smear because you know it would the health, their health, because the women think that they're so expendable and they're not contributors, hence they're expendable, hence they think that their health is not important. The man in the house, the son of the house, their health is more important. So if there's a budget for health in the family, the huge amount of that budget goes to the males of the family rather than towards the females of the family, and that is unfortunately something I've seen it while I've been working. So all the best. I think this is an amazing thing that you're doing, and I really, really wish you all the best for it. And I'm looking forward to a book which will tell us a little more about that, also about sisterhood health, let's say. But right now, as of now, to all the members who are watching and who are going to look at the sisterhood economy, I think it's a wonderful book and definitely something that we all should be reading. Not just us women, but the men too.
Thank you, Sonali. Pleasure.
It is
Thank
such a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you.
All the best for your book. Bye. Bye. Thank you, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Tell us in the comments what you thought of this. See you soon. Bye-bye.